So we're so happy to introduce you to the wonderful Caitie Humphrys, who tonight will be sharing a keynote speech with us. Caitie is in her final year of a Bachelor of Counselling and has many years experience in youth ministry and working with young people in different settings. So welcome to our Vigil, Caitie.
Thanks, Holly. It's great to be here. Thanks to yourself and to Peter and to Jean-Marie for inviting me. Mental health is something that I'm super passionate about, and it's so necessary that we talk about it. There's been more and more talk about it in my lifetime, but it's something that can't be over discussed or promoted, I don't believe. So I want to share with you a little bit. I come from an approach to mental health of looking at it holistically. I don't think there's one correct thought pattern or method. And the other part of my approach to mental health is my spirituality, my Catholic faith, and how that has navigated my own journey with mental health and how I believe it can bring us freedom as Catholics, like that beautiful image of Christmas and the winter solstice and Jesus bringing light into our darkness. And that's certainly true of what I believe God can bring to our mental health journey. So I do have some notes I'm going to work off, because mental health is such a multifaceted topic. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover it conclusively tonight. And the thing that makes mental health the trickiest to talk about is, with 7 billion different people on this planet, there's 7 billion different experiences of mental health conditions. So you can never sum it up perfectly. You can never speak to everybody's individual experience. So you might come away thinking, oh, that was very general, and that is intentional. So just going to try and share my screen. Be patient with me as I give this a go. Okay. So the statistics around mental health can seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's important that we know how prevalent it is. And the statistics I'm going to share with you tonight are from the Black Dog Institute, one of Australia's leading institutes into mental health conditions. So they tell us that 1 in 5, or 20% of Australians, are going to experience a mental health condition in any given year, which is more common than redheads walking around in Australia. But the more conclusive, or the broader statistic we have, is that at least 45% of Australians will experience a mental health condition during their lives. So there's not a single Australian that will go unaffected by mental health conditions, whether it's their own experience or it's the experience of a loved one, someone they care about. And I don't say that to scare anybody or to catastrophize the situation. I say it because I think the more, or I highlight that statistic because the more we're aware of the commonality of this issue, the more willing we are to get help, the less shame there is in it, when we know that this is more common than having blonde hair in Australia. Then why wouldn't we just treat it as something that can be addressed? There's no shame in mental health conditions. It's actually so common that it would be natural that we would seek help and seek support. So the most common age group in Australia to experience mental health conditions, so obviously it doesn't discriminate and can affect all age groups, but is 18 to 24. And there's a number of reasons for that. There hasn't actually been conclusive research done into why that is, but a lot of the hypothesis around it is that it's a time when people are leaving school. So there's a lack of community. They've had a set community in school. They've had a sense of purpose and a place to go. They leave that sense of purpose and they leave that community. The other reason is because there's a higher rate of experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And drugs and alcohol have a huge impact on our mental health when we abuse or misuse drug and alcohol, or even not. For some people, the smallest amounts of drugs and alcohol can impact their mental health. So there's a few reasons that seem a bit more obvious than others, but they're just some of the reasons. Also, relationships can get a bit tricky. Around those ages can get a bit more complex sometimes. So it's really important that we look after our mates in those areas, in those age groups. The tricky thing about mental health, other than all of it, unfortunately, is that quite often people experience a combination of mental health conditions at once. So it's very common to experience depression and addiction, for example, often come hand in hand with anxiety too. Or anxiety and depression, very common just together. The problem with that is that they often have different treatments. So we'll talk a little bit more about depression and anxiety coming up. But when you've got two conditions appearing simultaneously that have two different treatments that sometimes don't gel well together medically in your body, it's really hard. And it can be exhausting trying to find the right balance there. It's a little bit like, say you had, well, it's not anything like it, but say, for example, you have a cold and you have the chicken pox at the same time, two very different treatments, some overlapping symptoms, but sometimes maybe the medication can clash. So it makes it quite complicated. And anxiety and depression are the two most commonly experienced mental health conditions in Australia. But the rise in people seeking help for body dysmorphia and for addictions is on the rise as well. So the thing with research around mental health is it's not fully reliable because there's still a lot of shame for people experiencing mental health, or a lack of awareness of what mental health conditions are, that it's underreported. So the statistics we get are people who've seen a GP or seen a health professional. So we look at that 45% of Australians, and that's probably quite lower than it is, because not everybody who experiences anxiety is probably aware of what they're experiencing. So it's just so crucial to know what it is and how to support one another. I want to share with you a video that is a whole bunch of UK young adults sharing about their experience, mental health in their own words. And I think it's healthy or helpful to capture. If you're someone who has experienced or is experiencing a mental health condition, this might feel a bit triggering for you. Feel free just to put it on mute until it's done, if that's the case. But this can be really helpful for those who haven't experienced mental health conditions, just to hear from people's own honest experiences of what that's been like for them. Okay.
I was about 16 when I was diagnosed with depression. My doctors think that it stemmed from my parents divorcing and struggling with school, really.
It all started when my father died when I was at high school.
It all started in university during my final year.
It all started when I was 16. I came out of a relationship I was in at the time, and I started purging and self-harming.
I first realised I had a mental health problem when I was 15. I was cutting myself every day and crying all the time.
Soon after the attack happened, I started to feel throes of anxiety, panic attacks started creeping in.
I first realised that I had a problem when I really wanted to stop all the things I was doing, but I just couldn't seem to stop no matter how badly I wanted to.
I was suffering from hallucinations, which at the time were really scary because I didn't know what was reality and what was my imagination.
At my worst, I felt like I was absolutely worthless, alienating and destructive, with no help of recovery.
I felt like I had this black cloud hanging constantly over my head, and it's just a feeling that stays with you and you can't seem to get away from it at all, and you feel completely alone.
I felt like this was going to be it forever.
I felt as though I'd never reach any of my ambitions or my goals.
I felt like I was in my own bubble, hearing muffled voices of people around me.
When I had my first proper mental breakdown, and I decided to run away from home.
I felt like the world would be better off without me.
My mental health problem means that I go through many highs and lows which I struggle to control.
Sometimes I just want to hide away.
I feel that I have to make everyone else happy and every day is a struggle, but I just remind myself that I'm strong.
My mental health problem means that sometimes the world can be a very scary, very dangerous and very dark place.
Everyday tasks can become the most mammoth missions that seem like you're never going to be able to do them.
My mental health problem means that life is hard.
The hardest thing about having a mental health problem is people not realising that there's something wrong with you and that you can be really ill even if you look absolutely fine. I think especially having an eating disorder, people assume that you're going to look a certain way or be a certain size or a shape, or they imagine certain stereotypes that aren't necessarily true.
Like the social, and in my case like the cultural stigma associated with it.
If I'm having a bad day, no matter how small it is, it feels like the whole world's crashing in on me and things just keep getting worse.
Just trying to get the people around me to understand what I'm going through when they haven't gone through something like me is probably the hardest thing.
Social situations in particular can be really difficult. I sometimes can't commit to what we'd call sort of normal everyday activities.
The word schizo, I think it has a lot of stigma attached to it. I really don't like it.
What really reassured me was knowing that there are so many other people out there who've got the same diagnosis as me and that I'm not alone.
Having my 2 rescue dogs to look after and to take care of, because I know that they need me around and they're always happy to see me. So no matter how bad my day is or how awful everything seems to be, I know that they need me and they always make me smile.
Having such a great network of friends, family, and people who are out there who can help.
I'd look at how far I've come and everything that I'd gone through and realise that I am still standing.
It really helps when my friends treat me the way that they did 6 years ago before this all started. I was that happy, laid-back person, and that's the person that I want to be and aspire to be again.
It really helps me when people just treat me normally.
I'd like people to treat me like you would your own mother, I guess. I think that's a good way to treat people.
I don't want people to tiptoe around me.
I would like people to treat me like any other normal person, but also just to be a bit more sensitive around me, not to be stigmatised, depression and everything, and telling me to cheer up and everything.
I wish I'd known how much I was going to grow and learn as I grew up and grew older. I wish I'd known how much therapy was going to help me and how much I was going to gain from that. And I wish I'd known that it was possible to meet people who would love me for all of me, including my mental illness.
That I didn't have to feel so alone and that there was a lot of support out there.
That there are people out there and organisations that can help me.
I don't regret having mental health problems because it has made me who I am today.
I wish I'd known just how supportive people can be once you tell them what you're going through.
People are accepting. They're not going to walk down the street and cry, "You mental case." They're not going to, they're not going to do anything like that. Everyone's incredibly understanding. And if they're not, them.
So the best piece of advice I'd have to give would be just getting over that initial fear of coming out to people about your condition, because once you talk about it, it really does help.
The best piece of advice I ever got was to just focus on today, because you can't change what's happened in the past, and there's honestly no real way of predicting what's going to happen in the future.
I know it's hard, but be yourself and be brave, and you will recover.
Take each day as it comes, and even if that's too much, break it right down to just 5 minutes at a time. I find that really helps.
Just ask for help, just make that step and ask anybody, and they will be supportive for you.
Everybody has scars. Some people have them in the mind and some people have them on legs like I do.
Just basically be yourself. That's simple enough and what it might be a bit cliche, but I guess it's true.
It's okay to be mental, and that most people are, just not in the same way as you, but there are ways to get help.
Even if you think that things can't get better, that you've tried so many times and you've fed up and you've had enough of trying, things really can, and you can get better and you can recover. So don't give up on yourself.
Okay. I love the vulnerability that they offer in their stories and the way they share that. And I think there's just such beautiful insight into what their experiences have been like for them. And as I said, 7 billion people on the planet, 7 billion different experiences of supporting someone with mental health or their own mental health journey. But I think it can just help people have some insight into, what that's like if they haven't experienced it themselves. Or it can help those of us who have experienced mental health conditions not feel alone and to resonate with different aspects of those stories that have been shared. A little bit about my own experience, and I'm not going to delve too deeply into it tonight just because of time. That's my beautiful family up there on the screen. So I probably first started experiencing depression in hindsight, probably when I was about 12. I had been sounds so typical, but very happy-go-lucky kid, the kid at Christmas who'd put on her dancing costumes and dance for a whole family, and I'd be singing and, all that stuff, super, super outgoing. And I remember when I was about 12, some days I'd just get sad for no reason, get incredibly moody. Mum would describe it like a switch was flicked, and some days I'd just be an awful daughter, and other days I'd be okay. And that started to progress. And what I found out much later on in my mental health journey, was that I have a cyst in my pituitary gland. So your pituitary gland that controls your release of hormones. As I hit puberty, all that kind of started to come to light. And so for me, my experience of depression had a huge physiological component to it. A lot of people will have arguments about whether mental health conditions are physiological or environmental. For me, that was a very strong combination of both. The other thing I wasn't aware of too strongly at that time in my early teenage years was that I'd experienced some childhood trauma that was starting to play out as I got older. And for me, as my depression went untreated for that first 2 or 3 years until I was about 14, 15, it progressively got worse. There's a lot of behaviour involved around mental health conditions that go untreated, and sometimes treated, that can escalate the experience of mental health conditions. So I'd say depression was my Kickstarter, but I started an unhealthy habit of lying as to why I was feeling so low or so sad sometimes. And as those lies got progressively worse, I started to experience anxiety around, what if people found out? Nobody's going to love me if they know the truth about me, or the lies I've told, and things like that. So I ended up being one of those dual cases of depression and anxiety. I probably didn't really know much about anxiety back then. But as my mental health took a real strong curve, when I was about 15, I was hospitalised for a while. And while that was really difficult, it meant I started getting some really significant care, which is what catapulted my healing journey with my mental health. So I'm going to go into a bit of details of what care for mental health has looked like for me, just to show how detailed it can be. For some people, it's not this extreme, but it can be. So I was medicated, and what that medication did for me was to stabilise everything. It takes a while to get the right balance and levels of medication, but it stabilised everything to get me into a headspace to be able to do therapy, to be able to talk through certain issues and things that were arising. So I saw a psychiatrist for about 4 years, basically all through high school, most of high school. In year 12, I saw a psychologist who did cognitive behaviour therapy work with me, which is about noticing when you're starting to spiral downwards in your thoughts and learning how to stop those spirals and to counteract them with positive thought. It's a lot of what we now call growth mindset work. but really structural. It really helped me get through grade 12. Also, then they clued on to the cyst on my pituitary gland when I was in year 12. So they started to work with my hormones. Then as an adult, when I started to take more control of my own mental health journey, I began to realize in myself the impact that my diet and my physical health had on my mental health. So I knew things like if I had a lot of sugar, I was not okay, that I would really crash badly, mood-wise, just as well as energy-wise. I also realized the impact that alcohol has on my mental health. So, good Catholic girl, I love a wine like the best of them. But I also know that it can affect my mood for 3 days after, even only having, a couple of wines, I can be really affected. And exercise for me, I know, is just an absolute game changer. So if I'm having a particularly low day, if I can get myself out of bed into the sunshine and going for a walk, then it can really have a positive impact. But it's taken a lot. As I got into my late 20s, I was finally probably emotionally mature enough to deal with some of the childhood trauma I'd experienced. And that was the real game changer. And I'll explain a little bit more about trauma and depression shortly. But that was what really helped me overcome the environmental aspect of my depression. The physiological and the hormonal stuff's still there for me. But it's much easier to manage than environmental depression. So that was huge. So on top of all the other work I did, then in my late 20s, I probably did about 3 to 4 years of trauma therapy with a great counsellor. I'm really grateful for. The anxiety is something that probably came more to the forefront for me in my 20s. And that came out in panic attacks and in a whole lot of other things. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I learned to manage that as well. So I want to, share a little bit more in detail about depression and anxiety because they are so common. And if you don't experience them yourselves, it's highly likely a loved one will experience it. And one of the hardest things about depression and anxiety is not knowing how to help loved ones and not knowing what help you need yourself. So do a little bit of psychoeducation on that briefly. So when we talk about depression, and all of this is very generalized, like I said, please, if this doesn't ring true for you, then it might not be true for your personal experience or your loved one's experience. Depression is often a retrospective issue. So it's looking at dealing with trauma in the past or complicated grief. Just being sad isn't depression. Depression is more than just a feeling of sadness. Sadness is not a negative emotion in and of itself. Sadness is important. It shows a love of something or a feeling for something. Depression is something that is more long lasting, that affects the whole person more so. But yeah, generally it's something's happened in the past or there's a grief that's overwhelming that impacts. I think as Aussies, we can really have this attitude of just get on with it, like just deal with it, everything will be fine. But I don't think our bodies have caught up to that mentality because our bodies still hold our grief and our trauma, and that comes out physically because our stress affects our cortisol levels, affects our immune system, affects our overall health. So that's one aspect of it. But as I've said, it can be physiological as well. It can be a hormonal issue. It can be something like that. It can be trying to come to terms with a disability, or there's many reasons. Generally, depression is about past. So I just knocked my laptop. Things that can really help, medication can help. There's a lot of people who are in the natural or medication camp. I believe in using both together, personally. Medication, in my experience and in a lot of people's experience, can get your brain to a space where you can do the hard work of therapy, or can get you motivated to be able to do the exercise or get out in the sunshine that can help see long-lasting effect. It's so hard that exercise is such a positive treatment option for depression, because it's the last thing you want to do when you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to go anywhere, but it does make a massive difference. As I spoke about with my experience, diet helps a lot. Sugar has a huge effect on that. Sunshine, my psychiatrist when I was in high school, she used to say to me, Caitie, I don't care if you end up sleeping most of the day, but I want you to wake up in the morning and I want you to go out and get a couple of minutes of sunshine at least. She used to say 15 minutes. It has to do with our circadian rhythm, being awake with the sun, going to bed with the sun, and then the vitamin D. It just really helps a lot. It sounds so silly. Being from Brisbane, I'm lucky enough that usually we get sunshine most days. One of the most powerful contributing factors to positive mental health is connection. And Johann Hari has a great book called Lost Connection. I recommend everybody read it, no matter what. But the power of connection is so crucial. As I said, I think sometimes that's where we see the drop-off in mental health in 18 to 24, because we have a loss of connection. People might move out of home and lose that familial connection, school communities, things like that. But it is so crucial that you have people in your life that you can connect well to and authentically with. So my hope is that people have at least 3 people on their go-to list they know they can call, they can connect with, and it's a healthy, life-giving relationship. I also mentioned earlier that sense of purpose is really important. In Australia, we see a huge issue with the mental health in our retirees. So that loss of work, loss of sense of purpose. Everyone looks forward to retirement, but sometimes people can get there and then feel this lack of purpose and can struggle with depression. So having a sense of purpose, feeling like you're being a positive contributor to society and to your relationships is really crucial as well. Gratitude practices are an absolute necessity for good mental health. Now, I could talk for an hour and a half on this alone. There's so much research around gratitude. And it sounds ridiculous that one thing would have such a difference. I have a little gratitude journal. I write 3 things every day that I'm grateful for. And that sounds so cheesy and it sounds so insignificant, but it's actually the biggest practice, most helpful practice other than my hormonal medication for my depression that has helped me is a gratitude journal. Something so simple, so easy, so cheap. And I think what it does is because no matter how low you're feeling, how bad your day has been, you can still focus on a couple of things that have been positive. So for me, there's been very few days where I've had to resort to, I've got a bed to sleep in and a roof over my head and parents who love me. You know, they're powerful things to be grateful for, but usually even on a low day, there's lots of things for me to be grateful for. And that changes your mindset from everything's crap, everything's going wrong to there is good, there is such good. That light in the darkness, it's like, where's God showing up and being good to you in all of it? And I can guarantee you, if you look for it, it'll be there. And if you can't see it, ask God to show you what you have to be grateful for. Therapy with depression will help as much as the individual who is attending is open to it. So God gave us this gift of free will, and that applies in the therapy room as well. You can't sit there, be disinterested, not engaging, and expect miracles to happen. When we come to a place where we're genuinely desiring healing, and we're willing to go to the tough places, the hard places, the hurt places, to experience healing, that's where it happens. And I believe that that's God's desire for us. I believe that He wants healing for us and to bring us through that difficulty. Quite often in Christian therapeutic worlds, they can talk about depression, mental health as being like the Easter story. I know we're talking about Christmas tonight, but I'm going to throw a bit of Easter in there. But they talk about how the crucifixion's the hardship. It's the the awful stuff, and we want to get to the resurrection. When we want to heal from our mental health conditions, we want to heal from depression, we can't just go from the trauma or the grief or the instigating factor, if it's environmental, again, physiological is different, to experiencing the resurrection, to experiencing healing and freedom for it. We need to spend some time, unfortunately, but beautifully, with Jesus in the tomb. You know, the Easter Saturday, we need to spend that time there healing and addressing those wounds. And the beauty of that, in my experience, is that when we can choose to face our trauma and to deal with it, which is painful, I'd never want to take away from that. And I never want to make people feel bad for not choosing to deal with their trauma, because it is painful. But when we can hold that space and we can let God hold us in that space with the help of therapy, healing happens, and it's beautiful and it's powerful. And I believe that that's God's desire for us. My wholehearted belief is that our beautiful, loving Creator God doesn't desire us who experience mental health conditions to experience them for the rest of our lives. And as I went on that journey myself, whilst the physiological aspect of my mental health is still there, it's really manageable, totally manageable, when I've taken away that the grief and the trauma. Experiencing healing in my trauma that led to a lot of my depression, that really made it quite significant for me, and was what made life really hard for me. I experienced so much freedom in that. I experienced so much freedom in that, and I believe that that's what God wants for each of us. So when we talk about anxiety, it's a little bit different in that where I talk about depression being retrospective and dealing with things in the past, anxiety is often about fear of the future. And these fears of the future can be rational or they can be irrational. So an example of irrational fear might be you're going to a social situation. So social anxiety is very common. It's a very real thing. We throw it around a lot, but it is very real. So, for example, I might be deciding to go to a pub with my mates, and I might get some social anxiety and be like, oh, what if no one talks to me? What if someone says something derogatory towards me? All those things. I don't know any of that's going to happen. That's just purely fear, plucking fear out of nowhere. The thoughts come into my mind and I fixate on it, and it spirals out of control. Whereas a rational fear might be something like you've done something wrong at work. You've stepped out of line at work and your boss asked to speak to you. And leading up to that conversation, you might have a panic attack, or during the conversation. And that's because something hasn't gone right. The response might not be justified in the panic attack, but it's coming from a rational place, which means it's harder to talk yourself down from. So anxiety is hard. And for those who haven't experienced it, it's really hard to understand. But anxiety is hard because sometimes the fears are very real and they're based on things that could very well happen. Even if the fears are based on things that might not happen, they still feel very real. And it's a tricky one to navigate. Again, anxiety can be physiological. You'll hear often of people feeling like they're having a heart attack, but what they're actually experiencing is a panic attack and they've never had one before. So the symptoms are super physiological, and there's reasons for that. It's because our body goes into flight or fight, and the systems that aren't needed shut down. The body goes, I just need everything I can to survive in this moment in a panic attack, and I'm going to shut everything else down that's not needed. So one of the things that's not needed is your stomach acid, so it'll shut that down. So people often talk about experiencing nauseousness or feeling physically like they're going to be sick in a panic attack, and that's actually purely physiological. Your body's gone into fight or flight, shutting down. And there's other things, your breathing, believe it or not, your body doesn't think it's necessary in flight or fight sometimes. So your breathing gets irregulated, gets out of whack. So it's a really scary thing to experience a panic attack. Hugely scary. Now, the things that can help, medication can help at eliminating panic attacks. It was a while they gave me beta blockers to deal with my anxiety, but the problem was I wouldn't think I'd need them until I was in the full throes of a panic attack, and by then it was too late. So medicating anxiety is difficult, but it definitely can help. But there's a few things that really can aggravate experience of anxiety. Coffee and caffeine, unfortunately, are one of the biggest aggravators. So I love coffee, but I can't have it at all. Even when there's absolutely nothing for me to be fearful of. The other day, I decided just to test the theory out just to see if it still affected me. And I was driving to a haircut. Nothing was wrong. Everything was totally fine. I couldn't name a single fear I had, but my body started having an anxious response. And it stayed with me for about 12 hours. So for me, caffeine, no go, can't do it. Again, alcohol, unfortunately, can really aggravate anxiety, not just because if you drink too much, then you can get anxious about what happened or what's going to happen or what you said or what you didn't say, but actually just it can have a physiological response, as can sugar, alcohol, sugar, same thing. Significant change, it's really normal to experience anxiety around significant change, whether that's job change, moving, friendship circles moving, change in general. Decision fatigue is an interesting one that people sometimes aren't aware of, but it can increase and aggravate anxiety. So I read something interesting about Mark Zuckerberg. He always seen wearing the same thing, right? White shirt, jeans. And he said that he does that because it stops his decision fatigue from kicking into play. If he doesn't have to decide what he's going to wear, it stops his decision fatigue. But if you're making constant decisions all the time, that can impact your anxiety because you can be worrying and holding concern for all those decisions you've made. Have I done the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? All that can impact. So the things that really help breath work, because when I talked about how your systems can shut down, when you consciously choose to breathe, again, it's like gratitude. It sounds cheesy, but there's a breathwork exercise called 4-7-8, and it's choosing to breathe in for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 7, and breathing out for 8. And most people would struggle to do that at a good resting heart rate. The reason it's such an effective exercise is because when you're counting, and it's hard to think when you're counting, so your anxious thoughts, your fears, it's hard to tune into those when you're counting. And when you're breathing and counting, it takes actually most of your thought system up. So it can really be that circuit breaker to the anxious thoughts to get you going. So breathing in for 4, holding for 7, and breathing out for 8. Likewise, similarly, prayer and meditation can help. If I'm particularly anxious and I don't know why, prayer can really help me because I can ask God to show me why. If I know why I'm anxious, I can hand that over to God and ask him to breathe peace into it. Again, gratitude for similar reasons. When we're feeling anxious about things, focusing on the goodness in our lives really helps. Growth mindset. Therapy can help with anxiety, especially if you're not sure what's triggering it, you haven't experienced it before. Therapy can really help. CBT is actually really effective with anxiety. CBT gets a lot of bashing, but it's really, cognitive behavior therapy can really help. Again, those spiral thoughts out of control can help you learn tools to catch them and to use positive thinking and growth mindset to turn them around. GPs are really well equipped these days to support anxiety too, and I would highly recommend people use GPs. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go really quick because there's stuff I don't want to miss. But I'm sure people have heard that in the Bible, it's 365 times it says, don't be afraid, do not fear, I'm with you. Like, God doesn't want fear for our lives. He loves us. And I think the more we trust in his love for us, the more we can move away from fear and into trust with God, the more our anxiety will lessen. And that sounds so romantic and so simple, and it's not simple, but I think it is really his heart for us is to live a life free from fear. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we can support others, and I'm going to really speed through this. Sorry, Peter, for in-chambering. But I think we can really use God and Jesus as a model for how we accompany others who are struggling with mental health conditions. God accompanies us in that he simply is with us. He's just with us all the time. If you've heard Steve Angrisano speak, he does that beautiful thing where he gets you to breathe into your hand close to your face, and he says, God is closer to you in your breath. And I think that's true. Now, I'm not asking you to be closer to your friends than their breath, but just to be with. You don't need to fix. You don't need to heal. You're not a doctor. You're not a therapist. Well, maybe you are, but you're not there. Doctor or therapist, that'd be unethical. But just to be alongside, to be with. And it's not about teaching or fixing with. And it's not about fostering shame in someone else's life. You might not understand their mental health conditions, but you can ask them to explain it to you, and you can just be with them. I love this image. This is actually an image that I commissioned this painting, The Woman at the Well. And I think it's a beautiful, for me, it's kind of my vocation. It's what I see as my vocation. I feel like there's been others and God who've met me in my life in that place of real shame. For those who don't know the story of the woman at the well, her shame led her to go to the well when no one else was there to draw her water, and that's when she met Jesus. So I've had experiences of people really meeting me deeply in my shame and loving me where I was at, and I think that is our job, our model in how we love and how we support others, is just to be with them and journey with them. So some practical tips, and I might share my PowerPoint or something with people, but some of the things we can get scared about is, again, wanting to solve people's issues, but we don't need to do that. We just need to journey with them. And just be aware, is your reaction to what someone's sharing with you, is it about you or is it about them? Are you paying attention to them, what they're sharing with you, or are you craving attention back? Are you wanting to be seen as someone who can provide great support and great advice, or are you purely giving your attention to them? And if you're triggered by something that someone's sharing with you, which happens a lot around mental health, it could be because your boundaries are being threatened, could be because the person struggling with their mental health conditions, and I know I was guilty a lot of this, especially in my early 20s and teenage years, isn't respecting your boundaries and is demanding too much of you as their support person. The other reason is you might be being triggered yourself. It might be what's being shared might be tapping into your own journey, and you might go, oh, I need to get some support myself for that. Or it could be because you feel helpless to do anything. And that's where you surrender the person you're supporting over to God and say, they're your child, not mine, I'll do what I can, but God, please do more, please be with them. And refer. If someone shares with you something hard that they're going through with their mental health and they haven't seen a professional yet, please tell them to. Please support them to. Help them look up people in their area. Call Beyond Blue. Beyond Blue have phenomenal resources on their website, including online chat. I can't recommend Beyond Blue enough to everyone. And the last thing I would want to say about supporting people is judgment kills connection. This is a great quote from Brene Brown, who I adore, love. And if someone is sharing something hard with us and they sense judgment from us, that's going to kill their connection to us. So it's important just to really sit in that space of Jesus, in loving, affirming the other person that there's nothing they can do to make God love them any less, and there's nothing they can do to make God love them any more. They're not a person of faith, or even if they are, you don't have to say that to them, but just by you loving them no matter what, that's going to affirm that in them. Okay. Don't think we have time for questions. And I'm really sorry I went over, Peter, Holly, Jean Marie. But there's so much with mental health, and it's so hard to capture it all. So hopefully I've done it a little bit of justice. Cool. I think that's it for me. I'll hand back to you guys. Oh, there's a question. Sorry, Holly. I just saw that.
Yeah, let's take the question.
Yeah. So it says, question for someone, how can we help our mates who are struggling that might be draining our own mental health in the process? It's really important. You can't help someone. It's important to know that you aren't their healer, you're not their fixer. You can't play that role. And the hard thing is when people expect you to play that role and they lean on you for that role. And sometimes the most loving thing to do, it could damage the relationship, which is the hard reality. But the most loving thing to do is say, I can't help you. Like in this, I can't make you better. I can't maybe be who you want me to be, but I'll be for you. I think you need help from a therapist, or I think you need help from like that. I want me to help you to find someone. But you've got to look after yourself, because we see a phenomenon very often. People who are supporters of those with mental health conditions end up with mental health conditions themselves. So, yeah. That's all.
Do you have any other questions, Jean or Holly, that came up from our viewers?
I don't think there was any on Facebook.
All right. Well, Caitie, we're so incredibly grateful that you were able to spend time with us from Brisbane. and it's just so great. I think one of the things I know for me that getting to meet other youth ministry professionals and leaders around the country has been really helpful for my own mental health and my own well-being, just and in a professional capacity, but also I had a chance to listen to Caitie give a similar presentation last year at the Ignite conference in Brisbane, and I think your care and your passion for mental health, your vulnerability, for sharing your own story, it's just it's really helpful, I think, for lots of people to hear. And I also think that your knowledge and your wisdom, not only helpful in the youth ministry world, but I think anybody who's tuning in tonight, I think it's really helpful for us just to hear a little bit of the reality, and to hear the faith connection to, mental health is part of our human condition, and sometimes some people have it harder, and some of us have good days and bad days, and that there's a whole mix, and so we can have compassion for one another. I think it's such a huge message in this time. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks so much for having me.